For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On Saturday, August 12, 1995, 17-year-old Jessica Marie Phillips disappeared during a beach trip to Huntington Beach State Park in South Carolina. The marine biology student with long auburn hair had walked alone from a nature trail to use the restroom facilities, but never returned to her friends who were waiting at their beach setup. Despite one of the most extensive search operations in the region's history involving multiple agencies and specialized units, no trace of Jessica was ever found. 4 years later, commercial fisherman Captain Tommy Rodriguez hauled up something unexpected in his nets that would finally reveal the shocking truth about her fate. Saturday, August 12, 1995, began like countless other summer days in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The temperature had already reached 82 degrees by 9 a.m., promising another scorching day that would draw thousands of tourists and locals to the coastal waters. Among them was 17-year-old Jessica Marie Phillips, who had planned what she hoped would be a perfect day at the beach with her 3 closest friends. Jessica stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with long auburn hair that she typically wore in a ponytail during outdoor activities. Her friends often teased her about her extensive collection of vintage band t-shirts, and that morning she had chosen her favorite, a faded Nirvana shirt paired with denim shorts and well-worn flip-flops. A small silver cross necklace, a gift from her grandmother, completed her outfit and never left her neck. The Phillips family lived in a modest ranch-style home in the Socastee area of Myrtle Beach, about 10 miles inland from the ocean. Jessica's father, Robert Phillips, worked as a construction foreman, while her mother, Catherine, was employed as a secretary at the local high school. They had moved to South Carolina from Ohio when Jessica was 12, drawn by Robert's job opportunities and the promise of a better quality of life. Chapter 1: The Last Summer Day. Jessica was entering her senior year at Socastee High School in the fall and had already been accepted to Coastal Carolina University, where she planned to study marine biology. Her fascination with ocean life had developed during the family's move to the coast, and she spent much of her free time reading about marine ecosystems and volunteering at the local aquarium. The beach trip had been planned for weeks by Jessica's close-knit group of friends: Amanda Chen, 17, Sarah Rodriguez, 16, and Michelle Thompson, 17. The 4 girls had been inseparable since Jessica's arrival in South Carolina, bonding over their shared interests in music, environmental causes, and their plans for college. They had established a tradition of monthly beach trips during the summer, often spending entire days swimming, sunbathing, and exploring the coastline. Their destination for August 12th was Huntington Beach State Park, located approximately 20 miles south of Myrtle Beach. The park offered a more natural setting than the crowded tourist beaches, with pristine sand dunes, nature trails, and excellent opportunities for wildlife observation. Jessica particularly enjoyed the park because it provided chances to see marine birds and occasionally dolphins in their natural habitat. The girls had arranged to meet at Amanda's house at 10 a.m., where Amanda's older brother David would drive them to the state park in his 1992 Honda Civic. David Chen, 19, was home from college for the summer and had agreed to provide transportation in exchange for the girls paying for gas and his admission to the park. The arrangement had worked well for previous trips, and David was considered a responsible and trustworthy driver by all the parents involved. Catherine Phillips had spoken with Jessica at 9:30 a.m. as her daughter prepared to leave for Amanda's house. Jessica had seemed excited about the trip and had mentioned that the group planned to return by 6 p.m. so they could attend a movie together that evening. She had packed a small backpack with sunscreen, snacks, a water bottle, and her camera, an inexpensive disposable model she had purchased specifically for documenting their summer adventures. The drive to Huntington Beach State Park took approximately 45 minutes, with the group arriving at the park entrance around 11:15 a.m. David paid the $5 entrance fee and drove to the main beach parking area, which was already busy with families and other groups enjoying the weekend. The parking lot was about 200 yards from the beach access point, connected by a wooden boardwalk that crossed over the protective sand dunes. The girls established their base camp near the southern end of the beach, where they spread out towels and set up a small umbrella that Amanda had brought for shade. The location provided easy access to both the ocean and the park's nature trails, allowing them to alternate between swimming and exploring depending on their energy levels and the heat. The morning activities proceeded normally, with the group spending time swimming in the Atlantic Ocean, taking photographs, and enjoying the snacks they had brought. Jessica was particularly excited when she spotted a group of pelicans fishing near the shore, and she used several shots on her disposable camera to capture their behavior. Around 1:30 p.m., the girls decided to take a break from the sun and explore one of the park's nature trails. The Sandpiper Pond Trail was a popular one. 5-mile loop that wound through salt marshes and offered opportunities to observe local bird species. Jessica had walked this trail several times during previous visits and often served as an informal guide for her friends. The trail was moderately busy with other park visitors, including families with children and several serious birdwatchers equipped with binoculars and field guides. The wooden boardwalk sections of the trail provided elevated views of the marsh ecosystem, and Jessica pointed out various species of herons, egrets, and other waterfowl to her friends. Approximately halfway through the trail, near the observation platform overlooking Sandpiper Pond, Jessica announced that she needed to use the restroom facilities. The nearest restrooms were located back at the main beach area, requiring a walk of about half a mile. Her friends decided to continue on the trail and meet Jessica back at their beach setup, as they were eager to complete the loop and return to swimming. This decision would later be scrutinized extensively by investigators, as it was the last time Jessica's friends saw her alive. Amanda Chen would later tell police that Jessica had seemed completely normal during their separation, showing no signs of distress or unusual behavior. The group had separated many times during previous beach trips without any problems, making the decision seem routine and safe. Jessica's walk back to the beach area would have taken her along the main park road, a paved path that was regularly used by pedestrians moving between the beach and other park facilities. The route passed through areas of dense vegetation and had several secluded sections where someone walking alone might not be visible to other park visitors. Park records showed that approximately 800 people had visited Huntington Beach State Park on August 12, making it a busy but not unusually crowded day. The visitor demographics included families with children, couples, individual nature enthusiasts, and several organized groups conducting educational activities. When Jessica's friends completed the nature trail around 3 p.m. and returned to their beach setup, they expected to find her waiting for them or see her walking back from the restroom facilities. However, Jessica was nowhere to be found, and her backpack and other personal items remained exactly where she had left them on her towel. Initially, Amanda, Sarah, and Michelle assumed that Jessica had been delayed or had decided to explore other areas of the park. They waited for approximately 30 minutes before becoming concerned about her extended absence. Jessica was known for being punctual and reliable, making her prolonged absence unusual and worrying. The girls began searching the immediate beach area, asking other visitors if they had seen Jessica. Several people remembered seeing a girl matching her description walking toward the restroom facilities earlier in the afternoon, but no one recalled seeing her return to the beach or leave with anyone else. At 4:15 p.m., more than an hour after Jessica's expected return, her friends decided to contact park authorities. They approached the ranger station near the park entrance, where Ranger Patricia Morrison took their initial report and began coordinating a search of the park grounds. Ranger Morrison's initial assessment was that Jessica had likely become lost or injured while walking alone in an unfamiliar area of the park. However, she also recognized that the prolonged absence of a teenager warranted immediate attention and systematic search procedures. The park's standard missing person protocol was activated at 4:30 p.m., involving all available park personnel and volunteer searchers among the park visitors. The search focused initially on areas between the beach and the restroom facilities, then expanded to include all trails and wooded areas within the park boundaries. By 5:30 p.m., when the search had failed to locate any trace of Jessica, Ranger Morrison contacted the Georgetown County Sheriff's Office to request additional resources and expertise. The case was beginning to show signs of potentially being more serious than a simple case of someone becoming lost in the park. Detective Michael Harrison of the Georgetown County Sheriff's Office arrived at Huntington Beach State Park at 6:15 p.m. to assess the situation and coordinate an expanded search effort. His initial evaluation identified several concerning factors that suggested Jessica's disappearance might not be accidental. The systematic search of the park had failed to locate any trace of Jessica or her belongings. The route between the beach and the restroom facilities was straightforward and well-marked, making it unlikely that she had become lost. Additionally, Jessica was familiar with the park from previous visits, reducing the probability that she had accidentally wandered into dangerous or unfamiliar areas. As darkness approached on August 12, the active search was suspended until morning, though law enforcement maintained a presence at the park overnight. Jessica Phillips had vanished without a trace from a busy state park in broad daylight, leaving behind only questions and the growing fear that something terrible had happened to the promising young woman who had simply wanted to enjoy one more perfect summer day. Chapter 2. The Search Begins. Sunday, August 13, 1995, dawned with a full-scale search and rescue operation at Huntington Beach State Park. Detective Harrison had worked through the night, coordinating resources and developing a comprehensive search strategy that would involve multiple agencies and dozens of volunteers. The Georgetown County Sheriff's Office had been joined by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, the U.S. Coast Guard, and specialized search and rescue teams from throughout the region. The search area initially encompassed the entire 2,500-acre state park and gradually expanded to include adjacent private properties and waterways. The search teams were organized into specialized units based on terrain and search methodology. Ground teams systematically covered all hiking trails, wooded areas, and beach sections within the park boundaries. Water teams used boats and divers to search Sandpiper Pond, nearby salt marshes, and the coastal waters adjacent to the park. K-9 units from the Charleston County Sheriff's Office arrived at 7 a.m. and were given Jessica's scent from clothing items provided by her parents. The dogs were deployed along the route Jessica would have taken from the nature trail to the restroom facilities, hoping to track her movements and determine where she might have left the established paths. The K-9 teams made their first significant discovery around 9:30 a.m. The dogs detected Jessica's scent along the main park road, confirming that she had walked toward the beach area as expected. However, the scent trail ended abruptly in the parking lot near the restroom facilities, suggesting that Jessica had been placed in a vehicle at that location. This finding transformed the investigation from a search and rescue operation into a potential abduction case. Detective Harrison immediately expanded the investigation to include interviews with all park visitors who had been present on August 12, focusing on anyone who might have witnessed suspicious activity in the parking area. The parking lot investigation revealed that the state park maintained a log of vehicle license plates for all visitors, though the system was not consistently enforced and many vehicles were not recorded. However, park rangers had noted several out-of-state vehicles and commercial trucks that had been present during Jessica's disappearance. One vehicle that drew particular attention was a white panel van with North Carolina license plates that had been parked near the restroom facilities for most of the afternoon. Several witnesses remembered the van because it seemed out of place among the typical family vehicles and beach cars that usually frequented the park. The van's owner was identified as 34-year-old Marcus Webb, a contractor from Charlotte, North Carolina, who claimed to have been visiting the park for legitimate recreational purposes. Webb was located and interviewed on August 14, but he provided a plausible alibi and willingly submitted to a polygraph examination, which he passed. The investigation expanded to include a comprehensive background check of all park employees and regular visitors. Huntington Beach State Park employed 23 full-time and part-time staff members, including rangers, maintenance workers, and naturalists. Each employee was interviewed and subjected to detailed background investigations. The employee interviews revealed that several staff members had noticed unusual activity in the park during recent weeks. Maintenance worker James Rodriguez reported that he had observed an unfamiliar man photographing children and young women on multiple occasions during July and early August. However, Rodriguez could not provide a detailed description of the individual or specific dates when the incidents had occurred. The investigation also revealed that the park had experienced several incidents of suspicious behavior during the summer of 1995. Rangers had received reports of unauthorized camping, vandalism, and at least one attempted sexual assault near the nature trails. However, no arrests had been made in connection with these incidents, and it was unclear whether they were related to Jessica's disappearance. Detective Harrison coordinated with law enforcement agencies throughout South Carolina and adjacent states to determine if Jessica's case might be connected to other missing person reports or unsolved crimes involving young women. This analysis revealed several potentially related cases that warranted further investigation. The most significant connection was to the case of 19-year-old Laura Martinez, who had disappeared from Myrtle Beach State Park in June 1994. Laura had been visiting the park with her boyfriend and had vanished while walking alone to a concession stand. Despite extensive searches and investigations, no trace of Laura had ever been found. The similarities between the two cases were striking. Both victims were young women who had disappeared from South Carolina state parks during daylight hours while separated from their companions. Both had vanished without leaving any physical evidence, and both cases involved circumstances that suggested the possibility of abduction. Detective Harrison contacted Detective Robert Chen, who had investigated Laura Martinez's disappearance, to compare case details and evidence. The collaboration revealed additional similarities that had not been immediately apparent, including witness reports of suspicious vehicles and individuals observed in both parks during the relevant time periods. The joint investigation expanded to include a review of all unsolved missing person cases involving young women throughout the southeastern United States. This analysis identified a pattern of disappearances from recreational areas, state parks, and beaches that spanned a 3-year period and multiple states. The pattern suggested the possibility of a serial predator who targeted young women in isolated outdoor settings. The perpetrator appeared to be highly mobile, striking in different locations separated by hundreds of miles. The cases shared common elements. Victims were young women between 16 and 22 years old, disappearances occurred during daylight hours in public areas, and no physical evidence was left behind. As the investigation entered its second week, the focus shifted from search and rescue to criminal investigation and behavioral analysis. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was contacted to provide expertise in developing a psychological profile of the suspected perpetrator. The FBI analysis suggested that the perpetrator was likely a white male between 25 and 40 years old, with above-average intelligence and significant knowledge of outdoor recreational areas. The pattern of crimes across multiple states indicated that he was either employed in a job that required extensive travel or was unemployed and using criminal activity to support his lifestyle. The profile also suggested that the perpetrator conducted surveillance of potential victims before striking, indicating patience and planning that characterized organized predatory behavior. The ability to approach victims in public areas without arousing suspicion suggested that he appeared trustworthy and non-threatening. Meanwhile, Jessica's family was struggling to cope with the uncertainty and media attention surrounding her disappearance. Robert and Catherine Phillips had taken leave from their jobs to participate in the search efforts and coordinate with law enforcement. They had also established a tip hotline and offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to Jessica's safe return. The family's ordeal was complicated by the intense media coverage that the case had attracted. Jessica's disappearance had been featured on local and national television news programs, generating hundreds of tips but also attracting unwanted attention from reporters and curiosity seekers. Amanda Chen, Sarah Rodriguez, and Michelle Thompson were traumatized by their friend's disappearance and the guilt they felt about the decision to separate during their nature trail walk. All 3 girls required counseling to cope with the stress and their fears about what might have happened to Jessica. The Georgetown County Sheriff's Office had received over 300 tips related to Jessica's case by the end of August 1995. Most proved to be false leads or cases of mistaken identity, but each required careful evaluation and follow-up investigation. The volume of information was overwhelming and required additional personnel to manage effectively. One promising lead came from a convenience store clerk in Conway, South Carolina, who reported that a young woman matching Jessica's description had been in the store on the evening of August 12th. The woman had appeared distressed and had been accompanied by a man who seemed to be controlling her movements. However, the store's security cameras were not functioning that day, and investigators could not verify the report. Another significant lead came from a truck driver who reported seeing a girl who looked like Jessica at a rest stop near Florence, South Carolina, on August 13th. The driver, William Martinez, stated that the girl had seemed to be trying to get attention from other travelers but had been quickly led away by a man. However, Martinez could not provide a detailed description of the man or the vehicle they had been using. As September 1995 began, the investigation had generated extensive information but no definitive answers about Jessica's fate. The case had been classified as a suspected abduction, and law enforcement agencies throughout the Southeast were maintaining alertness for any signs of Jessica or her suspected abductor. The investigation was about to enter a long-term phase, with periodic reviews and follow-ups but reduced day-to-day activity. However, the answers that the Phillips family desperately sought were waiting in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, where they would remain hidden for 4 more years until a routine fishing trip would bring them unexpectedly to the surface. Chapter 3. Following the Pattern. As autumn arrived in 1995, Detective Harrison's investigation had evolved into a multi-state effort involving law enforcement agencies from Florida to Virginia. The suspected serial pattern had been confirmed through the identification of 7 additional cases involving young women who had disappeared from outdoor recreational areas over the previous 4 years. The expanded investigation revealed disturbing similarities across all 9 cases. The victims ranged in age from 16 to 23, all had been described as attractive and outgoing, and each had disappeared during daylight hours while separated from companions. The geographical distribution suggested that the perpetrator was following major interstate highways, particularly I-95 and I-77, which provided access to numerous state parks and coastal areas. Special Agent Patricia Moore from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had been assigned to coordinate the multi-jurisdictional investigation. Agent Moore had extensive experience with serial predator cases and recognized patterns that indicated a highly organized and sophisticated offender. The perpetrator's ability to operate across multiple states without leaving physical evidence suggested careful planning and knowledge of law enforcement procedures. The behavioral analysis revealed that the perpetrator likely conducted extensive surveillance before selecting victims and striking locations. The choice of state parks and recreational areas provided him with legitimate reasons to be present, allowing him to observe potential targets without arousing suspicion. The pattern also suggested that he was familiar with the layout and security measures of these locations. Agent Moore's profile indicated that the perpetrator was probably employed in a job that provided both cover for his travels and access to outdoor recreational areas. Potential occupations included traveling salesman, truck driver, park maintenance worker, or recreational vehicle dealer. The profile also suggested that he might be using recreational activities like camping, fishing, or hiking as cover for his predatory behavior. The investigation team had established a task force headquarters in Columbia, South Carolina, to coordinate information sharing and resource allocation among the participating agencies. The task force included detectives from 9 jurisdictions, FBI agents, and specialized analysts who were dedicated full-time to solving the connected cases. One of the task force's first priorities was to develop a comprehensive timeline of the disappearances and map the perpetrator's apparent movements. This analysis revealed that the crimes occurred in clusters, with periods of activity followed by apparent dormancy. The pattern suggested that the perpetrator might have other commitments or activities that limited his availability for predatory behavior. The geographic analysis also revealed that the perpetrator appeared to be moving in a roughly circular pattern through the southeastern states, returning to previously visited areas after intervals of several months. This pattern was consistent with someone who had regular routes or territories associated with legitimate employment or activities. The task force's investigation included a comprehensive review of employment records for individuals who worked in jobs requiring travel throughout the target region. This analysis focused on companies that provided services to state parks, recreational facilities, or tourism-related businesses. The investigation also examined records of recreational vehicle registrations and camping permits. One individual who emerged as a person of interest was 38-year-old Donald Craig, a sales representative for a company that manufactured and maintained playground equipment for state parks and recreational facilities. Craig's territory included all of the states where disappearances had occurred, and his work schedule would have provided him with access to the crime locations. Craig lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and had been employed by Southeastern Recreation Systems for 6 years. His job required him to visit state parks throughout the region to assess equipment needs, coordinate installations, and perform maintenance inspections. Company records showed that he had been present in the vicinity of several disappearance locations within days of when the crimes occurred. The investigation into Craig's background revealed several concerning factors. He had been divorced twice, with both ex-wives reporting that he had exhibited controlling and possessive behavior. He had no children of his own but had shown excessive interest in his ex-wife's children from previous relationships. Additionally, he had been arrested in 1989 for disorderly conduct at a beach in Florida, though the charges had been dropped. Surveillance of Craig was initiated in November 1995, with investigators monitoring his movements and activities during his work travels. The surveillance revealed that Craig often deviated from his scheduled routes and spent extended periods at state parks and recreational areas, ostensibly for legitimate business purposes but often without clear justification. The surveillance team observed Craig photographing young women at various locations, though he was careful to maintain distances that would not obviously violate privacy expectations. He carried professional quality camera equipment and appeared to be documenting his activities, behavior that was consistent with organized predatory patterns. However, despite the intensive surveillance, investigators could not observe Craig engaging in clearly illegal activities. His interactions with young women appeared to be limited to casual conversations that could be explained by normal social behavior. The investigation required careful balance between thorough monitoring and avoiding harassment of a potential suspect who had not yet been charged with any crimes. In January 1996, the investigation received a significant boost when Craig's former employer provided additional information about his work history. The company revealed that Craig had been the subject of internal complaints about inappropriate behavior toward female employees and customers. While no formal charges had been filed, the company had modified his work assignments to limit his contact with women. The investigation also revealed that Craig had been questioned by police in connection with a missing person case in Tennessee in 1992, though he had not been considered a serious suspect at the time. The Tennessee case involved a 20-year-old college student who had disappeared from a state park during a camping trip with friends. The case remained unsolved, and investigators were reviewing it for potential connections to the serial pattern. Meanwhile, the families of the missing women had formed a support network to share information and advocate for continued investigation efforts. The Phillips family had become particularly active in organizing awareness campaigns and fundraising events to support law enforcement agencies working on the cases. Catherine Phillips had established relationships with the other families and had become an informal coordinator for their collective efforts. The group met monthly to discuss case developments and plan activities designed to keep public attention focused on the missing women. Their efforts had generated significant media coverage and had resulted in additional funding for the investigation. The support network had also been instrumental in identifying additional potential cases that might be connected to the serial pattern. Family members had contacted law enforcement agencies throughout the region, requesting reviews of unsolved missing person cases that might have been overlooked during the initial pattern analysis. This grassroots effort had resulted in the identification of 3 additional cases that appeared to fit the established pattern. The expanded series now included 12 disappearances spanning from 1991 to 1995, making it one of the largest suspected serial abduction cases in the southeastern United States. As 1996 progressed, the investigation continued to focus on Donald Craig and several other potential suspects who had been identified through various analytical techniques. However, despite the extensive resources devoted to the case, no arrests had been made and none of the missing women had been found. The investigation had reached a critical juncture where continued surveillance and analysis were producing diminishing returns. The task force was under pressure to either develop sufficient evidence to make arrests or to scale back the intensive investigation to allow resources to be devoted to other cases. Agent Moore recognized that the case might require a different approach or an unexpected development to achieve a breakthrough. The perpetrator had demonstrated remarkable skill in avoiding detection and had left no physical evidence that could be used to establish definitive connections to the crimes. The answers that investigators were seeking lay hidden beneath the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, where they would remain undiscovered for 3 more years. When those answers finally surfaced, they would come not through sophisticated investigative techniques, but through the routine activities of a commercial fisherman who would haul up more than he had bargained for in his nets. Chapter 4. The Investigation Stalls. By the summer of 1997, 2 years after Jessica Phillips' disappearance, the multi-state task force had been officially dissolved due to budget constraints and the lack of significant progress. Detective Harrison had been reassigned to other cases within Georgetown County, though he continued to review Jessica's file monthly and maintain contact with her family. The investigation into Donald Craig had ultimately proved inconclusive. Despite extensive surveillance and analysis of his activities, investigators had been unable to establish definitive evidence linking him to any of the disappearances. Craig had eventually become aware of the investigation and had hired an attorney, effectively ending the surveillance operations. In March 1997, Craig had voluntarily submitted to a polygraph examination administered by the FBI. The results were inconclusive, with indicators suggesting both truthfulness and deception on different questions. While the polygraph could not be used as evidence in court, the mixed results had not provided investigators with the clarity they had hoped to achieve. The behavioral analysis had also reached its limitations without additional evidence or developments. Agent Moore had refined the profile multiple times, but the perpetrator's apparent cessation of activities had made it difficult to gather new information about his methods or motivations. The last confirmed disappearance in the series had occurred in November 1995, suggesting that the perpetrator had either moved to a different region, been arrested for other crimes, or had died. The families of the missing women had continued their advocacy efforts, but public and media attention had gradually diminished as time passed without new developments. The Phillips family had established a foundation to support families of missing persons and had raised over $75,000 for investigative assistance and victim support services. Catherine Phillips had become a recognized advocate for missing persons cases throughout South Carolina. She had testified before the state legislature about the need for improved coordination between law enforcement agencies and had worked with other families to establish support networks and information sharing systems. However, the lack of answers about Jessica's fate had taken a severe toll on the Phillips family. Robert Phillips had suffered a heart attack in late 1996, which doctors attributed partly to the stress of his daughter's disappearance. The couple's marriage had been strained by their different coping mechanisms and their disagreements about how actively to continue searching for Jessica. The investigation had also affected the other families involved in the suspected serial pattern. Several marriages had ended in divorce, and multiple family members had required extensive counseling to cope with the uncertainty and grief. The lack of closure had prevented normal grieving processes and had left the families in a state of suspended animation. Law enforcement agencies throughout the region had implemented improved procedures for handling missing person cases as a result of lessons learned during the investigation. Enhanced coordination protocols had been established, and specialized training had been provided to officers who handled such cases. While these improvements had aided in resolving other cases, they had not helped locate Jessica or the other missing women. The case had also influenced changes in security and safety procedures at state parks and recreational facilities throughout the Southeast. Many locations had implemented enhanced lighting, improved communication systems, and buddy system requirements for visitors walking alone. These changes had prevented several potential incidents, though they could not undo what had already happened. In 1998, 3 years after Jessica's disappearance, the case received renewed attention when it was featured on the television program Unsolved Mysteries. The segment included interviews with the Phillips family, Detective Harrison, and Agent Moore, along with detailed information about the suspected serial pattern and potential suspects. The broadcast generated over 200 new tips from viewers across the country, requiring several weeks of follow-up investigation. Most of the tips proved to be cases of mistaken identity or unrelated information, but the attention helped maintain awareness of the case and resulted in additional funding for continued investigation efforts. One tip from the broadcast seemed particularly promising. A viewer from Virginia reported that she had seen a young woman who resembled Jessica at a truck stop near Richmond in August 1995. The woman had appeared to be in distress and had been with a man who matched the general description of the suspected perpetrator. However, investigators were unable to verify the report due to the passage of time and the lack of supporting evidence. Another viewer reported that her neighbor had exhibited suspicious behavior and had made concerning comments about young women around the time of the disappearances. The investigation into this tip revealed that the individual was a registered sex offender with a history of crimes against women. However, background checks showed that he had been incarcerated during several of the disappearance dates, eliminating him as a suspect. As 1998 ended, the active investigation had been scaled back significantly, though the cases remained open and were reviewed periodically for new developments. Detective Harrison had been promoted to sergeant and was supervising other detectives, but he continued to maintain personal involvement in Jessica's case. The Georgetown County Sheriff's Office had established a cold case unit in 1999, partly in response to the Phillips case and other unsolved investigations. The unit was tasked with reviewing inactive cases using new technologies and investigative techniques that had not been available during the original investigations. The cold case review of Jessica's disappearance included DNA analysis of evidence that had been collected but not previously tested due to technological limitations. While the analysis did not reveal new information about Jessica's fate, it did establish baseline profiles that could be used for comparison if additional evidence was discovered. The review also included a comprehensive analysis of cellular phone records, credit card transactions, and other electronic data that had not been thoroughly examined during the original investigation. This analysis revealed some interesting patterns but did not provide definitive evidence about the perpetrator's identity or the location of the missing women. By 1999, 4 years after Jessica's disappearance, her case had become part of the region's folklore, a reminder of how quickly a young life could be shattered and how difficult it could be to find answers to the most important questions. The investigation had consumed thousands of hours of investigative time and had cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it had not succeeded in bringing Jessica home or providing justice for her family. The Phillips family had learned to live with uncertainty, though they never stopped hoping for answers. They had relocated to a smaller home and had simplified their lives, dedicating their energy to their foundation work and their advocacy for other missing persons' families. Jessica's friends had graduated from high school and had moved on with their lives, though they remained haunted by the events of that August day in 1995. Amanda Chen had changed her major from marine biology to social work, inspired by her desire to help families dealing with traumatic situations. Sarah Rodriguez and Michelle Thompson had maintained their friendship but rarely discussed their memories of Jessica or the day she disappeared. As the investigation entered its 5th year, it seemed increasingly likely that the case would remain unsolved permanently. The families had accepted this possibility, though they continued to hope for a miracle. That miracle was about to come from the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, where the truth about Jessica Phillips had been waiting patiently for someone to discover it. Chapter 5: What the Ocean Revealed. July 15, 1999. 4 years and 11 months after Jessica Phillips vanished from Huntington Beach State Park, commercial fisherman Captain Tommy Rodriguez was preparing for what he expected to be a routine day of offshore fishing. Rodriguez operated the Carolina Dawn, a 42-foot charter boat that he used for both commercial fishing and recreational charters out of Georgetown, South Carolina. Rodriguez had been fishing the waters off the South Carolina coast for over 20 years and knew the offshore areas as well as anyone in the region. His typical fishing grounds were located 15 to 25 miles offshore, where the Gulf Stream provided nutrient-rich waters that supported large populations of grouper, snapper, and other commercially valuable species. That morning, Rodriguez was accompanied by his usual crew, first mate David Martinez, 28, and deckhand Kevin Walsh, 22. Both men had been working with Rodriguez for several years and were experienced in the demanding work of commercial fishing. The crew had planned to target grouper and snapper in an area approximately 18 miles southeast of Georgetown, where recent reports had indicated good fishing conditions. The Carolina Dawn departed Georgetown Harbor at 6 a.m. under favorable weather conditions. The seas were calm with waves of 2 to 3 feet, and the forecast called for light winds and clear skies throughout the day. The trip to the fishing grounds took approximately 90 minutes, with the crew using the travel time to prepare equipment and review their fishing strategy. Rodriguez had been experimenting with different types of fishing equipment in an effort to improve his catches and reduce the time required to land fish. On July 15th, he was testing a new type of weighted net system that was designed to reach deeper waters where larger fish typically congregated. The system required more sophisticated handling techniques but promised to increase both the quantity and quality of his catches. The crew began fishing operations around 7:45 a.m., deploying lines and nets in water depths ranging from 180 to 220 feet. The morning fishing was productive, with steady catches of grouper and snapper that met Rodriguez's expectations for the day. The new net system was performing well, reaching the target depths and bringing up good quantities of fish. Around 11:30 a.m., Rodriguez decided to move to a slightly different location where his electronic fish finder had detected promising underwater structures. The new location was approximately 2 miles northeast of their morning fishing spot, in an area where Rodriguez had not fished extensively in recent years. The crew deployed the weighted net system in the new location, targeting a depth of approximately 200 feet. The initial retrieval brought up a mixed catch of fish along with the usual assortment of debris that accumulated on the ocean floor: pieces of rope, plastic containers, and other discarded materials that had been deposited by currents over time. However, as Martinez and Walsh sorted through the catch, they noticed something unusual among the debris. Tangled in the net was a large plastic cooler that appeared to have been on the ocean floor for an extended period. The cooler was covered with marine growth and showed signs of prolonged exposure to saltwater, but it remained intact and appeared to contain something heavy. Rodriguez initially assumed that the cooler contained fishing equipment or supplies that had been lost overboard by another vessel. Such discoveries were not uncommon in commercial fishing, and coolers were frequently used to store bait, tackle, and catch during fishing trips. However, something about this particular cooler seemed different and more significant. The cooler was a large white model, approximately 48 inches long and 24 inches wide, with heavy-duty latches and what appeared to be additional weight attached to ensure that it would sink. The marine growth on its surface suggested that it had been submerged for several years, and the barnacles and other organisms indicated that it had remained stationary on the ocean floor rather than floating. Martinez suggested opening the cooler to determine its contents, but Rodriguez was hesitant due to the possibility that it might contain hazardous materials or illegal substances. Commercial fishermen occasionally discovered containers that had been used for smuggling drugs or other contraband, and opening such containers could create legal complications or safety hazards. However, curiosity eventually overcame caution, and the crew decided to examine the cooler's contents. Walsh used a pry bar to break the corroded latches, which had been sealed shut by years of marine growth and saltwater corrosion. As the lid opened, the crew was immediately struck by a distinctive smell that even the ocean air could not completely mask. Inside the cooler, wrapped in multiple layers of heavy plastic sheeting, were what appeared to be human remains. The plastic had protected the contents from marine scavengers, though decomposition and saltwater exposure had taken their toll over the years. Martinez immediately recognized the significance of their discovery and urged Rodriguez to contact the Coast Guard immediately. Rodriguez used his marine radio to contact the U.S. Coast Guard Station Georgetown at 12:45 p.m., reporting the discovery of what appeared to be human remains in a container retrieved from the ocean floor. The Coast Guard dispatcher instructed the crew to mark their precise location using GPS coordinates and to avoid disturbing the cooler's contents further. Within the cooler, in addition to the human remains, the crew could see several personal items that had been preserved by the plastic wrapping. These included what appeared to be a piece of jewelry, fabric from clothing, and a small camera. The items seemed to confirm that the remains were those of someone who had been the victim of a crime rather than an accidental drowning. Coast Guard cutter Vigilant was dispatched to the Carolina Dawn's location, arriving at 2:15 p.m. with a team that included investigative personnel and equipment for preserving evidence. The cooler and its contents were carefully transferred to the Coast Guard vessel, with extensive documentation of the recovery location and circumstances. The Georgetown County Sheriff's Office was notified of the discovery at 3:30 p.m., and Detective Harrison, now a sergeant but still involved in cold case investigations, was contacted due to his expertise with the Jessica Phillips case and other missing person investigations in the region. When Sergeant Harrison arrived at the Coast Guard station to examine the recovered evidence, he immediately recognized the potential significance of the discovery. The location where the cooler had been found was approximately 20 miles offshore from Huntington Beach State Park, placing it within the general area where Jessica Phillips had disappeared 4 years earlier. The initial examination of the personal items found with the remains revealed several pieces of evidence that suggested a connection to Jessica's case. The piece of jewelry appeared to be a small silver cross necklace, similar to the one Jessica had been wearing when she disappeared. The camera was a disposable model of the type that Jessica had been known to carry during her beach trips. However, the definitive identification would require forensic analysis and comparison with Jessica's dental records and DNA samples that had been collected from her family. The remains were transported to the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division's Forensic Laboratory in Columbia for comprehensive examination. The forensic analysis, conducted over the following week, confirmed that the remains were those of Jessica Marie Phillips. Dental record comparison provided positive identification, and DNA analysis verified the findings. The cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation, indicating that Jessica had been the victim of homicide. The discovery of Jessica's remains provided the breakthrough that investigators had been seeking for nearly 5 years. The cooler and its contents were examined extensively for any evidence that might identify her killer or provide information about the circumstances of her death. The forensic examination revealed that the cooler had been modified with additional weights to ensure that it would sink and remain on the ocean floor. The modification suggested careful planning and knowledge of marine conditions, indicating that the perpetrator had anticipated that the container might eventually be discovered and had taken steps to delay its recovery. The plastic wrapping inside the cooler had preserved several pieces of evidence that might not have survived if the remains had been disposed of differently. Fiber analysis of Jessica's clothing revealed the presence of foreign materials that could potentially be traced to the perpetrator's vehicle or other locations where the crime had occurred. Most significantly, investigators discovered that the cooler itself bore a manufacturer's code and serial number that could potentially be traced to its point of sale. The cooler was a premium model that was not widely available and was typically sold through specialized marine supply stores rather than general retail outlets. The investigation into the cooler's origin revealed that it had been manufactured by Yeti Coolers and had been part of a limited production run sold exclusively through marine supply stores in the southeastern United States during 1994 and 1995. The serial number indicated that it had been sold through a specific distributor network that included only 12 retail locations. Investigators contacted each of the 12 stores that had sold coolers from the same production run, requesting sales records and customer information from the relevant time period. While some stores had incomplete records due to the passage of time, several were able to provide detailed information about customers who had purchased similar coolers. The investigation revealed that Donald Craig, the individual who had been a person of interest during the original investigation, had purchased a cooler matching the exact specifications of the one found with Jessica's remains. The purchase had been made at a marine supply store in Myrtle Beach in April 1995, approximately 4 months before Jessica's disappearance. Craig's purchase of the cooler provided the first definitive physical evidence linking him to the crime. Combined with the circumstantial evidence that had been developed during the original investigation, investigators now had sufficient grounds to obtain search warrants and make an arrest. Craig was arrested at his home in Atlanta on July 28, 1999, and charged with the murder of Jessica Phillips. The arrest warrant was based on the cooler evidence and the pattern of circumstantial evidence that had been developed over the course of the multi-year investigation. During the execution of the search warrant at Craig's residence, investigators discovered additional evidence that linked him to other cases in the suspected serial pattern. The search revealed a collection of photographs, personal items, and documentation that suggested Craig had been responsible for multiple abductions and murders throughout the southeastern United States. Among the items discovered was a detailed journal in which Craig had documented his crimes, including specific information about Jessica Phillips and at least 6 other victims. The journal provided investigators with information about the locations where other victims might be found and the methods Craig had used to select and approach his targets. Craig initially denied any involvement in the crimes but eventually confessed when confronted with the physical evidence and his own written documentation. His confession provided details about Jessica's abduction and murder that had not been known to investigators, confirming that he was indeed responsible for her death. The confession revealed that Craig had been conducting surveillance of Jessica and her friends during their previous visits to Huntington Beach State Park. He had observed their routines and had planned his approach based on opportunities when one of the group members might be isolated from the others. On August 12, 1995, Craig had followed Jessica when she left the nature trail to walk to the restroom facilities. He had approached her in the parking lot, claiming to be a park maintenance worker who needed assistance with a problem involving her friends. Jessica's trusting nature and desire to help had made her an easy target for Craig's deception. Craig had forced Jessica into his vehicle and had driven her to a remote location where he had assaulted and murdered her. He had then disposed of her body in the weighted cooler, transporting it by boat to the offshore location where it had remained undiscovered for 4 years. The investigation revealed that Craig had used similar methods to abduct and murder at least 7 other young women throughout the southeastern United States. His job as a playground equipment salesman had provided him with legitimate reasons to visit state parks and recreational areas, allowing him to conduct surveillance and select victims without arousing suspicion. Craig was ultimately convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The convictions brought closure to multiple families who had been searching for answers about their missing daughters, though the knowledge of what had happened brought both relief and renewed grief. The Phillips family finally had the answers they had been seeking, though the reality of Jessica's fate was more difficult to accept than the uncertainty they had endured. Catherine Phillips attended Craig's trial and sentencing, stating that while justice had been served, nothing could bring back the daughter she had lost or restore the years of anguish her family had suffered. The case became a landmark in forensic investigation, demonstrating the importance of preserving evidence and the value of persistence in cold case investigations. The discovery of Jessica's remains had been the key to solving not just her case, but an entire series of related crimes that had terrorized families throughout the region. Captain Rodriguez and his crew were recognized for their role in the discovery and their cooperation with law enforcement. The case had shown that answers could come from the most unexpected sources and that the ocean, despite its vastness, could not hide the truth forever. Jessica Phillips had finally come home, and her killer had been brought to justice. The young woman who had simply wanted to enjoy a perfect summer day at the beach had become the key to solving one of the largest serial murder cases in the southeastern United States. Her legacy lived on through the improvements in investigative techniques and victim support services that had resulted from her case.